Hi. Our precarious times in my life have been bookended by two remarkable Cambridge titans of maths and computing. I was 6, the first time I heard of the other one. My mother, the mathematician, often told us of a character she worked with in 1942. People called him the Prof. He was a queer fish, Mum said, perhaps conveying more meaning than she intended at the time. She and he were comrades in arms, using maths and the first computers in a generational existential struggle. The Prof of 1942 was, of course, Alan Matheson Turing. The first time I heard from and met Ross was around 1975. We were both smart, independent-minded, troublesome and fickle Scots. Our connection then was phone phreaking. That's the computer hacking of those times, sending tones into phone exchanges and then routing yourself around the world. We became lifelong friends, and it was a real pleasure to have Shireen and Ross come to the wedding of myself and my husband in the last decade. We buddied up again when crypto wars began more than 30 years ago. Ross took the lead. He led resistance in defense of personal privacy and integrity through episode after episode. And you've all seen, I'm sure, in the news that the battle is back over Apple crypto. But in the background, there is the new generational existential struggle that was mentioned just a few minutes ago. And that war is here already in the digital spaces. And Ross is not here. For 20 years, a tide has been coming from the East, promoting inequality, intolerance, misogyny, and violence. All the things that Ross, from his heart and fundament, viscerally hated. Since January, as the British dramatist Russell T. Davies remarked just this month, a new tide of hatred is coming at us from the West. We know it, even if some of us fear to speak it. Some of you have to go back from here and face these demons, and Ross is not here. Ross, too, had personal demons. He has passed, but the light he cast and the paths to take and commitments to make is still bright and shining here. History will remember Ross Anderson as an early visionary founder of the digital resistance. Good luck, and thanks for your cheers earlier. Good luck with your part in the struggles ahead and with his memory. Thank you.
I was going to say that there are only 2 journalists here today, and then I just remembered that Duncan is also a journalist. But Duncan is a real journalist. He investigates things and he develops new knowledge. And I always have the sense when I'm at events like this one where there's full of academics and stuff that I'm basically a child taking notes. And that I don't actually know or remember how I met Ross. I could probably go back through notes into the early 1990s and find his name starting to pop up. It might have been at a Scrambling for Safety event on the politics of encryption. I don't know, Duncan might know better, but I was, I think, one of the first journalists to write about encryption in this country. I picked it up as a topic as early as 1992, I think, maybe 91. And Ross was one of the people that I ended up interviewing various times. Now, Ross, the Ross that you are talking about is to some extent a polished product. Yes, I know, but when I met him, he was much less polished. And journalists in particular were the subject of suspicion. You know, he never went as far as some of the people I've met who sort of like, don't write this down in the middle of dinner, you know. But I think it took him about 10 years to recognize that I wasn't actually going anywhere. I was going to keep popping up places. And also that I was on his side, sort of. The early days when I used to interview Ross, I always felt like I had to kind of protect him a bit because he would go off on tangents. I remember this one, I put this in the obit I wrote on my blog. I remember interviewing him about, I don't know, encryption or security or something, and he went off on this thing about microwaves in the U.S. Embassy in Moscow. And I'm thinking, the man is out of his mind. If you quote that, no one will listen to him. And of course, it turned out to be true. But I still thought it was better not to quote it. And in those days, I used to mentally refer to him as the mad cryptographer. One other story I will tell you is the time, by this time we had become friends. I realized that we were actually friends. The day I knew that was we were at a conference. I was out of cash. We were standing online in the cafeteria, and he bought me a sandwich. And so I kind of, okay, I guess we are friends now. This is good. I like being friends. And one time, it was a few days before Christmas or something, and I was writing yet another piece, and I called him up. We had agreed we would meet over Skype. I'm not sure he was fully sober because he insisted on playing me pipe tunes before he would talk to me. And this wasn't as bizarre as it seems. I have a second line as a folk singer, so he knew I was interested in folk music. And he was, as his playing pipes has only come up once before today, and I think it's important to say that he was very serious about playing pipes. He wrote papers on playing on chamber pipes, Scottish chamber pipes, and he was, he had a whole section of his website dedicated to it, and it is worth checking out. He was pretty good, He I think would have been able to make a living, to starve as a folk piper. Nobody makes money playing folk music, and I will tell you one story, I will finish with this, that was not in the blog obit that I wrote because I forgot it at the time. But in 2011, I was at this summit on health privacy in Washington, D.C. And there was a panel. And the panel has 8 speakers, and Ross is sitting on the end. And the panel was about health and electronic data and different beliefs about how it should be managed. And there are 7 American speakers, and they're all talking about this. And eventually, one of them turns to Ross and says, wow, this must seem so futuristic to you because, we're so far. And Ross looks at him and says, actually, we had those conversations 10 years ago. We're way ahead. Socialized medicine, these things come up earlier, and you could sort of watch all the heads explode.
Hey everybody, I'm Joe. I was Ross's student, 2008 to 2012. So when I looked, I was, I think, exactly the middle of his run of PhD students. So I guess I got to experience peak Ross, which was really great. So I'll just think back to a year ago when I heard the news about Ross. I was actually in the middle of a group meeting with my students in New York, which I pattern after the meetings all the meetings that I went to with Ross and others here. And of course, I had to tell my students, unfortunately, none of whom got to meet Ross, that their academic grandfather had passed. And they were really full of questions, and I immediately started talking about his accomplishments and how smart he was and how many things he founded, how much impact he had. And my students asked a good question, though. They said, why? Why was he able to do all this? So I tried to distill it down and think what were Ross's superpowers that let him accomplish so much. And as I told my students, he managed to both be one of the most curious people that I've ever known and also extremely skeptical. So Ross would talk to anybody. He would read anything. He would go to talks around Cambridge on any topic. He just kind of wanted to absorb it all and be exposed to it all. But he also sort of never really fully believed anything that anyone else was telling him. Everything that he heard, he had a a really exceptional BS meter, I would say, and he was really good at finding the right question to ask to get at the core of what someone's idea actually was. I think sometimes really theoretical cryptographers who are sort of used to wowing people with equations and math would sort of find it frustrating to talk to Ross because he would cut through all of the, the fanciness that they would try to throw at him, and they would say, well, but what you're doing really isn't that new. It was done in the 90s or whatever, and they would have to say, yeah, you're kind of right. So that's what I told my students. Be curious, be skeptical in huge quantities if you want to try and be like Ross. I believe Ross the person is gone, but he lives in me and all of his other students and the students of his students. Hopefully I can be as much like Ross as possible. So I've tried to have an office full of books, a group full of curious students, and just a bunch of great colleagues that I've tried to keep in touch with because Ross was so great. Even after I graduated, every 6 months or so, he would just send me a short email with some very specific question. And I just knew that he was still thinking about me and thinking about things that he'd want to be talking to me about. So hopefully I can keep that going in Ross's memory. Thanks.
Hi, Andrei Sargentov. I was here between 96 and 2004, so this is just a couple of reflections and stories, really, rather than a sort of fully pre-prepared speech. So my first experience, or rather first seeing Ross, was he gave software engineering one when I was an undergraduate here in the second year, which I think William has mentioned already. And it was an amazing course, right? It was full of case studies, so Therac and Ariane 5 and London Ambulance Service, and it was an amazing course. And actually, my first description of Ross back then was that he was cool. I don't think anybody mentioned that. He was really, really cool, right? And I realized that not at the time of the course, but so I got a scholarship at the end of that year, and I got a little thing to emboss on a book, but it had to be a hardback book. So I went and searched for a hardback book in a bookshop, and I found software engineering. And without even opening it, I bought it because that was my only criteria, hardback book. So I stamped the thing, and then some months later, I opened the book, and it was software engineering, but it was full of UML diagrams and nothing at all like what Ross taught, right? And utterly uninteresting. So that's when I first actually really appreciated Ross. My actual first encounter with Ross was, bizarrely enough, in front of an ATM machine on King's Parade, when I went there to get some cash. And I saw that as I was on the queue, the person joining the queue just behind me was Ross. I was absolutely terrified. I had no idea whether to say hello or not, but fortunately that was resolved because my turn came. And I typed in the PIN, covering it carefully with my hand, not really sure, but feeling very nervous about it, just like I am now, to be fair. And after that, Ross said, I'm glad my undergraduates practice what we teach them. I thought, all right, that was okay, that wasn't too bad. So I stayed here and I did a PhD, sadly not with Ross, but at some point I ended up doing some work in security, or anonymity rather, and I very kindly got an invitation to Ross and Shireen's house for a wonderful party, and the PhD students that were around, so I think Richard and George, etc., warned me that Ross had a dog. I think it was called Jimmy, right? And Jimmy was there, and Jimmy loves to bite famous cryptographers. And I have no idea whether this is true or not. And he bit Whit Diffie when Whit was there, right? And we were there, and we were trying to figure out a way that Jimmy would bite us, right? And we were very disappointed when we came, and Jimmy was locked away. Anyway, my point about this was that we had fun. We had enormous fun. It was all a bit like a family, right? And the papers also reflect that around the same time. And it was a very happy time. And I hope that was That's something that I really wanted to say, actually. In terms of what did we learn, right? And it's amazing that at the end of this day, actually, there's still something to say. So I think people describe Ross as enthusiastic and, you know, like a child with toys, etc. I call her passionate, right? He was incredibly passionate about this subject. And that is definitely something that I took away from this community, from this environment, and from Ross specifically. The second one is much more about what we have talked about a lot, which is this sort of his nature of questioning, and, you know, some people call it interrogation, and etc. And I always thought that this style was so distinctly there to produce something good, because we all knew that through that challenging debate, something really good would come out, and something better. It might not have been polished, and it might have been more polished in my time, but it was always that strive for something good that will stay with me. So thank you very much.
Good afternoon. My name is Nicholas Christin. I'm at Carnegie Mellon, and I can say that without Ross, I probably would not be in this line of work. The first time I heard Ross speak, I didn't talk to him, but I heard him speak, was in Berkeley, I think in 2003, at the workshop on the economics of peer-to-peer networks. He was summarizing WISE that had taken place in the same place a couple of months earlier. At that point, I was very much a networking and systems person, but I was kind of bored of it after doing that for like 5 or 6 years as a PhD student, so I was looking to pivot. And the summary of WISE sounded really fun. Like, I was like, this is cool. This is kind of what I want to do. So I read pretty much all of the papers from that workshop. And I was hooked, and I kind of pivoted. A couple of years later, in 2005, I just started at CMU, and I had to design a new security class for mid-career people in Japan. So immediately I thought, you know, Ross's work on security engineering seems super relevant because it's very holistic. It's looking at cryptography, but it's also looking at usability, excuse me, psychological aspects, public policy aspects. I was like, this is really good for like real world people and not us in the ivory tower. So I was like, I probably should, you know, read the textbook in a little bit more details. So I read the whole thing. I was going to say in one sitting. It's a long textbook. It wasn't one sitting. But over a couple of days, pretty much like you would read a mystery novel. It's a book about security engineering, right? So that's a testament to the fact that Ross was an amazing scientist, but he was also an amazing, amazing writer. Still hadn't met Ross in person, right? But I was like a big, big, big fanboy. And then a few years later, I forgot when it was, 2007, 2008 maybe, and I think it's Tyler who introduced me. I had the pleasure of being introduced in person, and I don't even remember the venue, but I remember being terrified because I had heard at that point of Ross's famous low tolerance for idiocy. And I was like this, you know, total fanboy being like, please, I don't want to make a fool of myself. I don't want to make a fool of myself. Turns out that I was scared for nothing. He was absolutely lovely. He was really, really, really nice and super supportive. I rationalized it by telling myself, he's of Scottish descent, I'm French. We all agree that the English are the root of all problems in this world. But really, it was absolutely fantastic to junior people. And I want to emphasize that we've heard about his very, very sharp wit. We've heard an excerpt from this 2010, I think, letter to somebody who was requesting a takedown. That was reserved to people in position of power that really shouldn't have been there. For junior people, sometimes if you had a bad idea, a dumb idea, he would tell you that, but he would tell to you very gently, and he would encourage you, and he would help you refine it. The wit, the acerbic wit, that was reserved for people that were in, again, positions of power. And in the Festschrift, I also discussed my professional interaction. One of my main professional interactions with him, we co-wrote a grant, and I invited him to be on that grant proposal. Suffice to say, that completely changed my career. It was a very, very big grant. I don't think that if Ross had not been on that grant proposal, we would have gotten it. It changed the career of several people. Some of them are in this room. And what was amazing is that it was not just this, senior faculty descending and lending his name to it. He was actually editing that thing very late at night. Sorry, Shireen, but he was with us. And then, amazingly, he was extremely involved in a project. He was writing those monthly reports that we had to submit. They were awful, right? We had to do this. It was paperwork. He was doing it. And I was like, you're more reliable than some of my graduate students, even though you could just say, I don't want to deal with any of that stuff. So myself and many others, pretty much all of us in this room, we owe Ross a lot. I'm sad I was never able to tell him this directly, but he had a tremendous impact on my career. I can't repay him directly, but what I can do, and what I'm going to try to do, is, like Joe said, be more like Ross and try to use him as an inspiration when I'm interacting with more junior people now. Thank you very much, and thank you, Ross.
Good afternoon. I'm Boris Hemkemeyer. I work for Commerzbank, a German major bank. And I met Ross for the first time in this building in 2008. His Magnus Opus, the second edition of his Magnus Opus, Security Engineering, has been published a few months ago, and I knew only a few of his papers about chip and pin security. I gave in this room a presentation about cybercrime, online banking security, phishing malware, and something else. And we talked later a lot about it. But what really impressed me when we met was his energy and his desire to make a difference in the real world. He stood up for the victims of cybercrime. He defended privacy. He fought against injustice. And he didn't fear neither government nor industry. The last time we met was at the Vice Conference 2023 in Geneva. He talked about his plans for the time after his retirement. And he had still so many things to do, things that can no longer be done by him. But we shouldn't forget that he educated and inspired 2 or 3 generations of security engineers and researchers who now work in industry and academia. We will miss him. Thank you.
Hello. I've come here hopefully to say a few true words about a man who meant a lot to me and left us much too soon. And Ross is not merely missed, but needed. My first encounter with Ross Anderson was as one of his proofreaders for security engineering for the third edition. And I spotted an error and very intrepidly approached this giant, thinking, "It was nonsense, it's not an error." And he just immediately, being such a great and enthusiastic communicator, wrote back to me saying, "Yes, this is fantastic, give me more." And so we entered into a fantastic email dialogue that went on for 18 months or more. And Ross was so obviously immediately up for the banter. My background's in, I'm a computer scientist from another mother, an adjacent discipline, it's digital signal processing, and I got into security really after post-Snowden era, sort of 2012, 2013, running crypto parties with the idea to teach ordinary people like my sister and my mum and my colleagues about cybersecurity and how it's important to everyday life. And what I see, Ross is kind of like a alpha particle in a cloud chamber. It's evident by the trail that he leaves, and I can see that in all of the energy and memories here today. I once, some of my students discovered some interesting, notable thing about vendor malware, in which where the things that we buy are compromised at source, they're owned out of the box, and I wrote to Ross and I said, don't you think this is something that's important, and maybe you could suggest a journal that we could send this to? And he said something like, I don't see what the point would be to write this in a journal whose readership, if the bus crashed on the way to the conference, that entire discipline would cease to exist. Go to the press. Go to the press with it. And that was his kind of direct, pragmatic, just grounded in reality and the urgency with which he felt that things should be done. I kind of think that we've lost somebody very important, but what I hear today is how urgent that work is, how much all of us have a huge challenge ahead of us, and thank the Lord that we had Ross and we have his memory.
So thank you all. We have a little bit of time. I wanted to leave it open if anybody in the audience would like to stand up and say something. Please.
I was telling you a story earlier. I was just checking for us. So 2013.
Oh, that's right. We'll get you in the recording.
We had a visit, and John Norton knows about this. We had a visit from Eric Schmidt, who was giving a sequence of talks around the world about how wonderful Google was and cool things it would do to the world. And Ross and Simon Pettin-Jones from Microsoft have been involved in creating a new curriculum for computing at schools. And the idea was to teach programming in schools rather than just IT and fixing printers. And we were not making much headway with the government. So Eric Schmidt was there, and Ross knew that Eric Schmidt was going to see Michael Gove, who's the Minister for Education, the next day in Whitehall. So he set it up so that Eric Schmidt would suggest that it was a brilliant idea that Michael Gove had come up with to change computer science in schools in the UK. So Michael Gove then the next day gave a speech going, he'd heard how much Google respected the UK for our computer science. So Ross had socially engineered the head of Google to get the Minister of Education to change his mind to do something to get computer science to improve. The brilliance about this, of course, the timing was not coincidentally when the Raspberry Pi came out and we gave a bunch of those away to schools. So there wasn't even a budget problem giving the computer school, but you needed to get the schools to agree to shift people, usually from design and technology and so on. But the trick was that piece of social engineering, and it was absolute genius. And I was just checking my emails. It's January 24th, 2013. And the next day, you can look it up. And Ross actually, I think, even called up Dominic Cummings and suggested that just to check that the backstory wouldn't get muddied somewhere. But this is this is on a level, nobody. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say. I just, wow, what a guy.
Okay. Hard to top that. But I think we should thank Frank for putting this together. because it is more work than you think to put one of these together, because every piece is fractally annoying and continues to be through the end.